Grand Central is locked down because of these rioting Palestinian protesters. People need to get home, and they can't get out. They can't get out, they can't get in.
So recently, a massive protest took place right here with activists completely taking over New York's largest train station to stop President Trump, who's got them all riled up by deporting various leaders of college campus resistance movements, canceling their visas when they espouse anti-American viewpoints. But as you're about to see, that's got people so worked up. The protests happening now likely won't be the last.
And we've seen how violent these protests can get. Looking at that vision, it's certainly a safety issue for commuters.
This morning, a stunning ruling against Columbia University activist Mahmoud Khalil. An immigration judge in Louisiana ruling Khalil can be deported. While at Columbia, he helped lead protests against the war in Gaza.
You know, I gotta be honest, I do constantly worry what happens if that happens when I need to get onto a train, because that is a major mode of transportation for most people who live in the suburbs. Getting into Manhattan.
Tens of thousands of rally goers walking down Fifth Avenue did not let the rain stop them from expressing their dissatisfaction.
Every single day you wake up, it's some new horrible thing. Every time I listen to the radio, I start yelling at it. The libraries, the Smithsonian, education.
They hate America, they hate the West, and they hate Israel, which is one of our best allies. So we need to have a serious conversation about who we're letting into this country and what that's doing to the fabric of our society.
So by arresting this guy and promising to deport him, Team Trump has poked the hornet's nest, so to speak. But what nobody's talking about is that by storming Grand Central and disrupting life for the general public, these protesters, they're showing the world what their true motives really are. Because when these progressive agitators arrived, they're armed with the same signs and slogans they espouse at every protest, where they're screaming for open borders, demanding the president go to jail, as well as pushing every other progressive cause you can imagine. And since there's no coherent message to this mayhem, these protests are revealed to be an excuse for anybody who's mad about anything to make a sign and show up, disrupting a city of 8 million hardworking people just trying to make it home for dinner, yelling and screaming in the faces of those who, by carrying a briefcase instead of a disfigured effigy of the president, find themselves on the receiving end of a movement claiming to stand against fascism by fighting for a more peaceful world where they get to be the ones calling the shots. Which brings us to the real reason these protests aren't going anywhere and why they always seem to be one step away from societal unrest. They take place in public and are led by people angry about something related to the basic functioning of America, whether it's capitalism, border security, or support for the oldest democratic country in the Middle East. All of these things are offensive to those whose real problem isn't whatever's written on their sign. Instead, those signs are just cover for anti-American viewpoints our country's leaders have finally decided do not have a place here on a visa. But as you're about to see, the push to continue deporting hostile visitors from our country means places like Grand Central better get ready for round 2. So when protesters took this place over, it caused a security lockdown. The doors behind me were closed and nobody could get out or get in. It was frightening for people who were here and weren't part of the demonstration. These wooden doors would not open, yet they opened 24 hours a day most of the time, and people trying to get home from work were prevented from doing so, which reveals that these societal disruption type events aren't about winning converts to the cause, but are rather just a couple of steps below open warfare against anybody these protesters think is part of the system they're against.
And we've seen how violent these protests can get. Looking at that vision, it's certainly a safety issue for commuters. You know, how do you feel being in New York, and how is this still being allowed to happen?
You know, I gotta be honest, I do constantly worry what happens if that happens when I need to get onto a train. I think there's a bigger problem here, and I think it's indicative of the fact that America needs to have a reckoning with their immigration policies, legal.
That's it right there. These protests, they're about immigration, and these protesters, they don't like what's happening on that front in this country anymore. No way. People are upset ICE is roaming around, sending gang members off to El Salvador's mega prison. And they're also furious that the President of the United States would cancel the legal status of someone who came here and espoused hatred for our country. And they're letting people know how mad they are about it in a less than peaceful manner. Now look, the situation in Gaza is terrible. Everyone hopes that that ends as soon as possible. But these protests, when they turn against America, that's a problem. Because that's how mayhem and societal unrest start. And when the leaders of these demonstrations are here on visas or have been given special permission to reside here without being citizens, it's hard to blame the host country for having an issue with that. And it's hard to imagine any country letting people in who then go about stirring up trouble against it. Also, if America's such an evil, horrible country and it's run by the worst president ever, why aren't people happy that he's giving people free tickets out of here by helping them leave?
Because there are a lot of people in this crowd who I bet are either on student visas, maybe they are on just a regular visa, maybe their parents immigrated here. Nonetheless, these are people who came to America and espouse anti-American and anti-West values. America is under no obligation to allow any foreigner to come to this country. And when we do, we should expect...
Exactly. Look, my wife is Japanese. What's going to happen if I go to Japan with her and our 3 kids, and I go in there and I start talking about how terrible the place is? If I were to say something like that, they would have every right to kick me out of their country. Of course, I wouldn't go there and do that, but we're letting people into America who are coming here and doing that? That doesn't make any sense. And when you're a visitor in any country that's not your own, you should make it your business to understand the local laws and obey them, and understand that as a visitor, stupid behavior will immediately result in consequences you don't want that citizens might not face themselves. And if you've got a personal opinion that goes against that country, perhaps keep it to yourself and voice it somewhere else after you leave. And honestly, if you hate a place so much that you're willing to bust out your iPhone and tell the world how awful it is, why are you even there? There are places that I personally believe are dangerous, but I don't have any plans to go there and then talk about how bad those places are. I'll just stay here.
He's not resisting. This morning, a stunning ruling against Columbia University activist Mahmoud Khalil. An immigration judge in Louisiana ruling Khalil can be deported. While at Columbia, he helped lead protests against the war in Gaza. In a memo, the administration cites a section of immigration law that says a migrant is deportable if their presence in the country has potentially serious adverse...
So those protests, those caused tens of thousands of dollars in damages to Columbia. And if you look at that place now, the entire facility, the whole campus, it's like a TSA checkpoint. They got scanners, they got gates, they got private security, they got signs everywhere. Nobody gets in or gets out unless they have a legitimate purpose to be on that campus. This is to stop the protesters from infiltrating it with more of their own who don't actually go to school there. That was a big problem when these things were taking place. And as we're seeing, the problem now is that these protests have migrated away from Columbia and are now happening everywhere else throughout the city. These are some of the folks that got arrested while taking over Trump Tower the other week. The same type of mayhem that happened over there was what took place here at Grand Central the other day. And although many of these protesters think they're making their voices heard for multiple issues at once, the fact that one of their leaders is now facing potential deportation from the United States kind of rolls all of these issues into one.
After the hearing, Khalil addressed the court about due process rights and fairness, adding, quote, "Neither of these principles were present today."
This guy has never been convicted of a crime, never been charged with a crime, very peaceful person.
His legal team.
Okay, stop right there. This defense attorney just spurted out 2 pieces of information that explain why these protests have gotten to the level they're at. And the first thing he says is that the man now being deported is a very gentle and peaceful person, even though he's the leader of a massive protest movement. But his peacefulness resulted in police having to break into Hamilton Hall at Columbia University with a ladder. His movement caused tons of damage to that campus. Look at it, everything got broken. Look at this, it was an absolute disaster. This is not peace, no way. And when people took over Grand Central and stopped folks from getting home or going about their business, that was not peaceful either. That could have been dangerous. What if somebody had an emergency and this place was all packed? If police or an ambulance had to get in here to potentially attend to somebody, they wouldn't have been able to because the crowds were just overwhelming. And to make matters worse, this individual is still telling people to go out and protest and resist. He's calling for more from his detention facility, but he's not staying quiet. He's trying to get people fired up for the cause. But it's not just this person's peacefulness that needs to be debated. In fact, this defense attorney, he said something else as well.
This guy has never been convicted of a crime, never been charged with a crime.
There it is, no prior criminal history. Therefore, he must be innocent, and all the people that took over this place, if they had no prior criminal history, should they be innocent as well? That's the tactic. Interestingly, this is the same logic we hear for why people who've got gang tattoos and are caught with weapons in this country shouldn't be deported. It's the first time this has ever happened. We should let them stay. You know something? Every criminal who's ever been arrested for anything at one point had no prior history. Even Al Capone had no prior criminal history at one point in his life. But one thing's for sure, we've already got proof these anti-Trump, anti-border security protests are bigger than just Columbia. And Grand Central Terminal is not the only place these protesters have tried to take over recently. And that's a problem because the weather here is just starting to warm up. When there's not snow and ice covering the ground here, and when it is not freezing, New York City becomes the perfect place for a mass protest. First of all, the cameras of the world are focused on this iconic city, and anything that happens here is a bigger deal than it would be anywhere else. And now we're starting to see mass demonstrations take over the streets and parks of this city, not just the train stations.
Tens of thousands of rally-goers walking down Fifth Avenue did not let the rain stop them from expressing their dissatisfaction. Organizers calling the demonstration a national hands-off day of action with a long list of grievances against several policies.
Okay, this is wild. Look at this picture right here. You've got people protesting the idea that dangerous individuals are being deported from this country to make it safer. That's the one thing these protesters all seem to be in unanimous agreement about. There should not be any deportations at all for any reason, even if the individual in question might be a dangerous person to have wandering about on the streets of New York City. But what do you expect? This event on the TV is full of college-educated rich people. They don't have any idea what's going on out in the real world. They live in little bubbles that are insulated from the problems affecting New York City and most of America. Their neighborhoods are not affected by the types of gang violence hitting the middle class in this city right now. And I'd be willing to bet many of them voted for Vice President Harris and wish she were president right now instead. These are the same people who think if gang members wind up in the backs of police cars for the very first time in this country, that we should just let them go. And part of the reason for that is that when they hear Trump is the one that wants to deport people, they stop thinking and they go crazy like this.
Every single day you wake up, it's some new horrible thing. Every time I listen to the radio, I start yelling at it, and all of the USAID.
You gotta feel bad for these folks. Every single day they wake up and they hear good things about how dangerous criminals like gang members that live for free in New York City shelters may end up getting deported, and they think that that is horrible because they don't like the person that's doing it. That's terrible. But that's because they've got nothing in common with people like this who really are affected by the activities of these gang members. Like this poor woman who doesn't want to see her kids who live in one of New York City's most notorious shelters swept into the criminal underworld. Everyone in town knows that this place is full of gang members. Everybody knows there's weapons inside. It's incredibly dangerous, but as a sanctuary city, we won't let our police in to do anything about it. And while these rich people claim that when they wake up and turn on their flat screen TVs, their life becomes a nightmare, a real nightmare would be living in a place full of armed gang members that doesn't allow police inside. Yet none of those protesters are out advocating for this woman or her family. And you know why that's never going to happen? Because in order to do that, you'd have to admit that an open border that lets criminals and gang members into our country is not a good idea. But to these people, it's their religion.
People showed up to stand up against some of the Trump administration's latest moves, like the implementation of tariffs, immigration operations, and reducing the size of some federal aid.
Aren't these the same people that would lecture you and me about inclusivity? And here they are advocating for viewpoints that are not inclusive at all, advocating for gang members and dangerous people to stay in the country. That doesn't help everybody. And advocating for people who have beliefs that pit them against others others for who they are, that's not inclusive either. And even though it's President Trump who's out there right now trying to make our country safer for everybody who's got legal permission to be here, he's the big meanie. He's the one who's divisive. He's the bad guy. Not the actual bad guys who should be in the back of this police van being driven away to a jail. Instead, they've become the bad guys. They're the reason this Transit Bureau mobile command unit is parked permanently in front of Grand Central right now. This beast is here so that when these protesters bring round 2 to Grand Central, the police can respond faster. But remember how we've been learning that these protests are just a way for people who hate America to come together and do all their hating in one place?
This is no longer a democracy. This is a total abuse of our freedom. Cutting USAID aid, for me, it has been the most disgusting thing that this government...
This is another example of how people are upset about something they know absolutely nothing about. If that person knew where that US aid money was going, they probably wouldn't be too happy about it. And if they are happy about it, then, well, we already know that they're not part of the solution, are they? Which brings us back to the idea that these are not people who actually want peace. And all these protests seem to do are attract folks who look like they're all mad about different things, but are really only mad about one thing. Or am I wrong about that? Should we let gang members and people who hate this place stay in it? Are they making America better or worse? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.